What's going on, everybody? Today we're talking about Todd Phillips' Joker. Revisiting this movie is a lot of fun because it's one of the first to break the status quo of what a superhero flick can be. Shockingly, one of the best things this movie does is it gives the Joker a clear identity. Now, most people's favorite interpretation, myself included, is that Joker's more of an anomaly and a force of nature rather than a being with emotions or morals. But this movie kind of foregoes that, and while it gives him a name and a story, somehow it still makes him that force of nature by the end when he's been fully realized. Regardless of if you're a Joaquin Phoenix fan or not, this performance is undeniably brilliant, especially when considering the fact that for the rest of time, every actor that dons the painted smile will forever be compared to Heath Ledger's Joker. Honestly, the best thing that could have happened for this film was the idea of not connecting the story to Batman. At least the fully realized vigilante that we know and love. This being entirely its own story allows Phoenix to not need to be compared to Ledger, because in reality these two Jokers have nothing in common. This isn't the actiony, clever anarchist that's plotting to blow up the city, at least not intentionally. Making this movie into a character study and using Joker as a vehicle to talk about mental health, classism, and general advocacy for the unheard, essentially the little guy, was what made this movie stand out independent of any other DC property. Hell, you could honestly argue this movie is barely a DC villain movie, because the lens is focused on the small details of a corrupt city. Joker himself isn't realized as the Joker until like the final third, and while the last chunk gives you the mayhem and chaos that you'd expect from a Joker movie, the first two-thirds were so unrelenting that you can't help but feel sympathy for this guy, even though you know he's the Joker. But at least for me, it doesn't feel too sappy or too attention-seeking, because Arthur's misfortune is solely constructed by external factors that are designed to keep putting him down. And because of Joaquin's compelling performance, you constantly see his darkness slowly leaking out as he's hopelessly fated to become the monster we know he's going to become by the end of it. His little mannerisms, like when his laughs sometimes turn into him choking because it physically hurts him to keep laughing, was just such a brilliant choice by Phillips. I'm sure the Hangover series has a lot of fans, and you can tell while the comedy is definitely darker, here it's actually still funny and effective because it adds to the delusion of the film. Todd Phillips' ability to add discomfort to many scenes are so expertly done, which just prove his talent as a director. And I love how Arthur's psyche from the very beginning is already glitched, but it doesn't start out as harmful or sinister. In his world, he's just trying to be a good person and a good son. And his imaginary first visit on the Murray show is probably my favorite bit of the movie, because the thesis of the movie is most evident here. When Arthur speaks of the motto he was told to live by his mother, "She always tells me to smile and put on a happy face," it's just so devastating, because as the movie goes on, you understand more and more how tragic that is. That thesis gets explored in such raw and unnerving ways. Nuance, guys, it's a powerful thing. Appreciation, or rather lack of appreciation, is kind of a theme in this movie. Most of the people depicted in this movie that have jobs kind of really feel like they aren't content with their jobs. For example, Arthur's boss, his therapist, and in a weird way, these characters all have this like gloom over them that kind of reads like they feel underappreciated. Likewise, Arthur keeps running into situations that emphasize the lack of decency in people. In that same vein, the scene when he discovers his true lineage, that he was a product of neglect and ill care, just completely destroying the perception of who he was, and essentially unlocking all those questions he had about himself. It's just such a powerful scene that, just like Arthur, you almost want to laugh at how unlucky all of that information sounded. I really love how reality for most of this movie is blurred, but in that moment, it felt the most real and the most painful for Arthur. And in general, it's just such a gorgeous movie. It's like the comic book movie that feels the least comic booky. The tone is so much more serious and grounded, and the color choices were always so breathtaking and vivid. And the world felt so in line with Arthur's being, where this city really did feel like a dump. And even though a lot of the movie was actually shot during day, it feels like a solid interpretation of Gotham. And I'm of the opinion that the parallels with with Taxi Driver, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, just adds to the experience of the movie. In some ways, you could argue Arthur and Travis are basically the same dude. And the addition of De Niro was great. He was funny and with little screen time became the slow building personification of everything Arthur loves and hates and forces him to choose which side he's really on. And I'd argue if he didn't kill Murray, he'd probably still be the same guy as soon as he hid Randall's body, of course. The score itself is somehow uplifting and also haunting at the same time, and it's very fitting because this movie asks some very powerful, strong questions, and paired with what's on screen, it allows you to decide, is it earned for him to act like this or not? Obviously, it's a heightened scenario, and I remember when this movie came out, at most theaters, at least near me, there was like cops around, and it was like they were trying to prevent riots and any of that stuff. And at the end of the day, he's still the Joker, so of course his sociopathic ways are definitely not justified. He uses violence to shed light on hypocrisy or the gray areas of justice. Take Nolan's Dark Knight with the infamous hospital scene, where the Joker says if a gangbanger were to be threatened, nobody would care. But if a little old mayor were to be threatened, then everybody loses their minds. Like, yes, we get the point, but it's still not justified. Same thing here. After Arthur kills those 3 Wayne Enterprise employees, we see so much wrong in this city, but when the discovery of those 3 jackasses was made, the town and news acknowledged it solely because of the status of those guys. This movie still has its flaws. Personally, I think the lingering shots, which are really well made, I would have cut out a couple of them because early on we start realizing, yes, it's supposed to create this unnerving environment, but the rest of the movie already takes care of that. Depending on your mood, the levity of this movie could have been boosted a bit, and I would have loved it if they would have just fully removed Bruce Wayne, because he's really not necessary. But ultimately, the movie comes full circle beautifully, because regardless of whether you believe anything in the movie was real or not, I just love how one of his last sessions of therapy with his first therapist, he tells her nobody listens to his plea for help, even though he's tried many times to speak, and then it ends with a similar situation with another therapist, except now, when the therapist asks if he would like to speak, he just says, you wouldn't get it. God, it's just so good because by this point, Arthur has made his choices and decisively now knows what he wants and what will make him happy, regardless of how twisted that may be. And this ambiguous ending would have made for a great one-off that wouldn't have needed a follow-up, but I guess we'll see with this sequel what it brings. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.